My wife left me for taking care of my dying father, and then came crawling back after she heard about the will. When Dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, I thought my wife Veronica would support me through the hardest time of my life. Instead, she gave me an ultimatum. "It's me or him," she said, arms crossed in our kitchen doorway. "I'm not spending the next 6 months watching you play nurse to a man who never even liked me." Dad had 6 weeks to live. 6 weeks. "He's my father," I said, exhausted from another sleepless night at the hospital. "And I'm your wife," she snapped, "the woman you promised to put first. But lately it feels like I'm married to a ghost." She wasn't entirely wrong. I'd taken family leave from work, spent every day at Dad's bedside, and came home drained. Date nights became medical updates. Conversations became logistics about medications and doctor appointments. But he was dying. How could she not understand that? "When my mother was sick, you barely visited her once," Veronica continued. "Now suddenly you're St. Thomas, devoted son of the year?" That hurt, because it was true. When her mother had breast cancer 3 years ago, I'd found excuses to avoid the hospital. The smell, the sadness, the awkward conversations about mortality. I'd let Veronica handle everything while I worked overtime, convincing myself I was being practical. "This is different," I said weakly. "How? Because it's your parent this time?" The fight escalated. She accused me of using Dad's illness to avoid our marriage problems. I accused her of being heartless. Words we couldn't take back flew between us like broken glass. 2 days later, she moved in with her sister Diane. "I need space to think," she said, packing her suitcase. "Call me when you remember you have a wife." For the next month, I split my time between Dad's bedside and an empty house that still smelled like her perfume. Friends said she'd come around once everything was over. That grief made people act crazy. But she didn't come around. Not when Dad could barely eat. Not when he started forgetting my name. Not even when the hospice nurse said we had days, not weeks. She sent a single text the day before he died. "I'm sorry for your loss." I buried my father alone, surrounded by his old work friends and distant relatives I barely knew. Veronica didn't show up to the funeral. Her absence left a Veronica-shaped hole in every condolence hug and casserole delivery. 3 weeks after the burial, I was sorting through Dad's papers when his lawyer Buchanan called. "Thomas, we need to discuss your father's estate. Can you come in tomorrow at 2 p.m.? I assumed it would be straightforward. Dad lived modestly, drove a 15-year-old Honda, shopped at thrift stores. Maybe there'd be enough to cover his remaining medical bills. I was wrong. Buchanan's office felt like a scene from a movie. Mahogany furniture, leather-bound books, the smell of expensive coffee. He gestured for me to sit across from his massive desk. "Your father was a very private man about his finances," he began, opening a thick folder. "But he was also very strategic." He explained that Dad had been quietly investing for 40 years, real estate purchased in the 1980s that had skyrocketed in value, stock picks that had multiplied beyond anyone's expectations, a small inheritance from his own parents that he'd grown through careful planning. The total estate value was approximately $3.2 million. I sat in stunned silence. $3 million. My father, who clipped coupons and wore sweaters with holes, was a millionaire. "There's more," Buchanan continued. "He updated his will 6 months ago, right after his diagnosis. Everything goes to you, with one very specific condition." He slid a document across the desk. In Dad's careful handwriting, there was a note attached to the will. My heart stopped when I saw what it said, because I realized Dad had been paying attention to everything. Every fight with Veronica, every time she'd refused to visit, every moment she'd made me choose between them. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from Veronica. "We need to talk. I'm coming over tonight." The note from Dad was brief but devastating. "Thomas, I've watched your wife abandon you during the most difficult period of your life. A person's true character emerges during crisis, and hers has been revealed. This inheritance comes with one condition. If you reconcile with Veronica, or give her any portion of this estate, everything goes to the American Cancer Society instead. You deserve someone who stands by you during the hardest moments, not someone who runs when life gets difficult. Choose wisely. Love, Dad." I read it 3 times, my hands shaking. Dad had seen everything, every eye roll when I mentioned visiting him. Every time Veronica had found an excuse not to come to the hospital, every moment she'd made me feel guilty for caring about my dying father. Buchanan cleared his throat. "Your father was very specific about this condition. The will is ironclad. If you marry Veronica or cohabitate with her within the next 5 years, or if you transfer any assets to her, the entire estate automatically transfers to the Cancer Society." "Did he tell you why he added this clause?" Buchanan nodded grimly. "He came in here 3 weeks before he died, said he'd been listening to your phone calls with your wife. Her exact words, I believe, were, 'Just let the old man die already so we can get back to our lives.'" My stomach dropped. I remembered that conversation. I'd been updating Veronica on Dad's condition, and she'd snapped at me for the 100th time about how this was affecting our marriage. I'd hung up on her, but I didn't know Dad had heard everything. He also mentioned that she'd been researching his property records online, Buchanan added, checking the value of his house, looking into whether he had any assets worth inheriting. The pieces clicked together. Veronica's sudden interest in my father's health updates, her questions about whether he owned his house outright, her casual comments about what we'd do with any money he might leave behind. She'd been calculating his worth while I'd been calculating his remaining time. That evening, I sat in my living room, staring at Dad's note while I waited for Veronica. I'd spent the afternoon researching everything Buchanan had told me. Dad's investments were even more impressive than the lawyer had initially described. He owned 3 rental properties that I'd never known about. His stock portfolio included early investments in companies that had become tech giants. My modest, thrifty father had been quietly building an empire while teaching me the value of hard work and humility. At exactly 7 p.m., Veronica's key turned in the front door. She still had her key, though she'd been gone for 6 weeks. She looked different. Her hair was freshly styled, she wore a dress I'd never seen before, and she carried a bottle of my favorite wine, an expensive vintage we'd shared on our anniversary 2 years ago. "Hi, Tommy," she said softly, using the nickname she'd abandoned months ago. "I know this is awkward, but I've had time to think about everything." She set the wine on the coffee table and sat beside me on the couch, closer than she'd sat in months before Dad got sick. "I want to apologize," she continued. "I handled everything wrong. I was scared and selfish, and I abandoned you when you needed me most." Her voice sounded rehearsed, like she'd practiced this speech in the mirror. "I know your father never approved of me, but I should have been there for you anyway. Marriage isn't supposed to be conditional." I studied her face, looking for genuine emotion. What I saw instead was the same expression she wore during work presentations, calculated, strategic, designed to achieve a specific outcome. "What changed?" I asked. "What do you mean? 6 weeks ago, you said I had to choose between you and my dying father. Yesterday, you wouldn't even come to his funeral. Today, you're apologizing and want to work things out. What changed?" She shifted uncomfortably. "Diane helped me see things differently. She said I was being unfair to you." Diane had never liked me and had encouraged Veronica to leave me multiple times over the years. The idea that Diane had suddenly become my advocate was laughable. "Really? Diane said that?" "She did. She said I should support my husband during family crises." I decided to test her. "That's interesting. When did you talk to Diane about this?" "This morning. We had coffee and she made me realize I was wrong." I pulled out my phone and opened social media. Diane had posted photos from her vacation in Florida that morning, photos that showed her at the beach, not at coffee in our city. "Diane's been in Miami for the past week," I said, showing her the photos. Veronica's face went pale. I mean, we talked on the phone. Long distance. Another lie. I could see her scrambling, trying to cover her tracks. "Veronica, I need you to be honest with me. What really changed your mind about our marriage?" She took a deep breath, and for a moment I thought she might tell the truth. "I realized I love you," she said instead. "I don't want to lose what we have over a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" "About priorities. I thought you were choosing your father over me, but I see now that you were just being a good son." Everything she said sounded like it came from a self-help book about repairing relationships. There was no genuine emotion, no real accountability for what she'd put me through. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of water while I processed everything. She followed me, standing close enough that I could smell her perfume, the same scent that had tortured me for weeks in our empty bedroom. "Tommy, I know I hurt you, but people make mistakes. Isn't forgiveness part of marriage?" "Some mistakes are bigger than others," I said. "I agree, but we can work through this. Maybe we could even use this experience to become stronger as a couple." She moved closer, placing her hand on my arm. "I've missed you. I've missed us." The physical contact felt wrong, like being touched by a stranger wearing my wife's face. "When did you find out?" I asked quietly. "Find out what?" "About the inheritance." Her hand froze on my arm. For just a moment, her mask slipped, and I saw panic in her eyes. "I don't know what you mean. My father left me some money. I'm wondering when you heard about it." I didn't know he left you anything. I assumed he didn't have much to leave." Another lie. I could see it in the way her shoulders tensed, the way she couldn't quite meet my eyes. "How much did you think he had?" "I don't know. I never really thought about it." I walked to my laptop and opened the browser history. Sure enough, there were searches for my father's address connected to property value websites. The searches had been made 2 days ago, the day before she'd texted me asking to talk. "These searches came from your computer," I said, turning the screen toward her. She stared at the evidence, her face cycling through emotions. Surprise, anger, calculation. "I was curious," she finally admitted. "After he died, I wondered if there might be enough to help us get back on our feet financially." "Back on our feet? We were never struggling financially." "Well, no, but extra money never hurts, right?" The casual way she discussed profiting from my father's death made my skin crawl. "How much do you think he left me?" I asked. She hesitated, clearly trying to figure out how much I knew versus how much she should admit. "I don't know. Maybe enough to pay off our mortgage?" Our mortgage was $180,000. She was fishing, trying to gauge whether it was worth her time to reconcile with me. What if it was more than that? Her eyes lit up. "More? How much more?" And there it was, the real reason she'd come back. Not love, not regret, not a desire to repair our marriage. Money. "Does it matter?" I asked. "Of course not," she said quickly. "I love you regardless of any inheritance. But it would be nice to know what we're working with for our future. Our future." She was already planning how to spend money that came from the man she'd refused to visit while he was dying. "Veronica, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest." She nodded eagerly. "If my father had died broke, would you be here right now trying to reconcile our marriage?" She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it. I could see her trying to calculate the right response. "That's not fair," she said finally. "You're making this about money when it's about love, is it?" "Of course it is. I'm here because I realized I made a mistake. I'm here because I love you and I want to save our marriage." "Then you won't mind signing something." I walked to my desk and pulled out a document I'd prepared after leaving Buchanan's office. I'd suspected this moment might come. "What is that?" "A post-nuptial agreement stating that you waive any claim to inheritance I received from my father's estate." Her face went white. "Why would I need to sign that?" "Because if you're really here for love and not money, it shouldn't matter to you. She stared at the document like it was written in a foreign language. This seems hostile, like you don't trust me. Do I have a reason to trust you? She sat down heavily on the couch, all pretense dropping away. For the first time since she'd arrived, I saw real emotion on her face, but it was anger, not love. I can't believe you're doing this to me, she said. Doing what? Asking you to prove that you want me and not my father's money? You're being manipulative, using money to control me. The irony was staggering. She was accusing me of manipulation while sitting in my living room, wearing a new dress, carrying expensive wine, and trying to seduce me back into marriage because she thought I'd inherited money. How much is it? She asked suddenly. How much is what? The inheritance. I need to know what we're talking about here. We? You know what I mean. I sat across from her, studying the woman I'd been married to for 5 years. This was who she really was. Not the loving partner I thought I'd married, but someone who saw relationships as transactions. It's enough, I said finally. Enough for what? Enough to change my life. Enough to never have to worry about money again. Enough to travel, buy a new house, retire early if I want to. Her breathing got faster. I could practically see dollar signs in her eyes. Tommy, I know I handled things badly, but marriages go through rough patches. This could be a fresh start for us. With my father's money. With our money. We're married. What's yours is mine, right? Actually, no. Not inheritance money. Not in this state. I'd researched the laws extensively that afternoon. Inheritance was considered separate property unless it was actively commingled with marital assets. But if we stay married and I deposit it in our joint account, then it becomes ours, she said. The fact that she knew this revealed how much research she'd done. Is that your plan? I asked. Come back, wait for me to deposit the inheritance, then divorce me and take half? How can you say that? I'm trying to save our marriage. By researching property law and showing up the day after you found out I inherited money. She stood up, pacing around the living room like a caged animal. Fine. You want me to be honest? Yes. I heard about the money. Diane saw the obituary online and noticed it mentioned your father's successful business ventures. She looked up property records and found out he owned multiple properties. She called me. The truth, finally. And it was worse than I'd imagined. So you decided to come back because you found out he was rich. I decided to come back because I realized what I'd lost. Not just you, but the life we could have together. The wealthy life we could have together. Is that so wrong? Money makes everything easier. We could pay off debt, travel, buy a nice house, maybe start a family. The mention of starting a family made me sick. She'd refused to discuss children for years, saying we couldn't afford them. Now, suddenly, with my father's money, kids were back on the table. Where were these dreams when you left me 6 weeks ago? I was scared and confused. Your father's illness brought out the worst in both of us. It brought out the worst in you. It brought out something I didn't even know existed in you. She stopped pacing and faced me. What do you want me to say, Tommy? That I was wrong? Fine, I was wrong. That I'm sorry? I'm sorry? That I should have been there for you? You're right, I should have been. But you weren't. But I'm here now. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized I was staring at a stranger. The woman I'd married would never have abandoned me during my father's final weeks. The woman I'd married wouldn't have shown up with wine and a new dress trying to seduce me into sharing an inheritance. This wasn't the woman I'd married. Or maybe it was, and I'd just never seen her true nature before. Veronica, I need you to leave. What? I need you to leave. Tonight. Don't come back. Tommy, please. Can't we at least talk about this? We are talking about it. And what I'm hearing is that you abandoned me when I needed you most, ignored my dying father, refused to attend his funeral, and came back the moment you heard there was money involved. I made a mistake. No. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or saying something hurtful during a fight. What you did was reveal who you really are. She sat down again, and for a moment she looked genuinely sad. I know I hurt you, but I love you. I've always loved you. Do you? Or do you love the idea of being married to someone who just inherited millions? Her head snapped up. Millions? I cursed myself for letting that slip, but the damage was done. How many millions? She asked. It doesn't matter. It does to me. And there it was, the final confirmation of everything I'd suspected. Get out, I said quietly. Tommy, get out. Now, before I call the police. She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw her cycling through strategy, anger, tears, seduction, guilt, who was trying to figure out which approach would work. Finally stood up. You're making a huge No, I made a huge mistake 5 years ago when I married you. I'm fixing it now. She walked toward the door, then turned back. You can't cut me out of this. I'm your wife. I have rights. Actually, you don't. Not to inheritance money, and especially not to this inheritance money. Something in my tone made her pause. What does that mean? I pulled out my father's letter and read the relevant section aloud. If you reconcile with Veronica or give her any portion of this estate, everything goes to the American Cancer Society instead. Her face went through a range of emotions. Shock, disbelief, rage. He can't do that. He did do that. The will is ironclad. We can contest it. On what grounds? That you're entitled to money from a man you refused to visit while he was dying? She stood frozen in the doorway, processing everything. He really hated me, she said finally. He didn't hate you. He just saw who you really were. After she left, I sat alone in my living room, holding Dad's letter. I read it again, focusing on the final line. You deserve someone who stands by you during the hardest moments, not someone who runs when life gets difficult. For the first time since his death, I felt grateful for his final gift. Not the money, though that was life-changing, but the clarity. He'd saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. Over the following weeks, Veronica tried everything. She called, texted, sent emails. She showed up at my work, at the grocery store, at the gym. She promised she'd changed, that she'd learned from her mistakes, that money didn't matter to her. She even tried using mutual friends as intermediaries. Our friend Garrett called me one evening. "She's really broken up about this," he said. "Maybe you should give her another chance." "Did she tell you why we separated?" "She said you two grew apart during your father's illness." I told him the truth, about her ultimatum, about missing the funeral, about showing up the day after she learned about the inheritance. "Jesus," Garrett said when I finished. "I had no idea. She's good at controlling narratives. She told everyone you'd become obsessed with your father and were neglecting your marriage. What do you think now?" "I think you dodged a bullet." Others weren't so understanding. Veronica had painted herself as the victim of my sudden wealth and heartlessness. Some of our mutual friends chose sides, and I lost several relationships. But I also discovered who my real friends were. The ones who had watched me struggle through Dad's illness. The ones who had noticed Veronica's absence and said nothing because they didn't want to interfere in our marriage. 3 months after Dad's death, I was settling into my new reality. I'd paid off my mortgage, quit my soul-crushing corporate job, and started volunteering with a grief counseling organization. The inheritance had given me financial freedom, but more importantly, it had given me the clarity to build the life I actually wanted. That's when I met Rebecca. She was a nurse at the hospital where Dad had spent his final weeks. I recognized her immediately. She'd been one of the angels who had made his last days more comfortable. When I saw her at a coffee shop near the hospital, I approached her to say thank you. "Mr. Whitman," she said warmly, "how are you doing?" "Better. I wanted to thank you for everything you did for my father, and for me. He was a wonderful man. He talked about you constantly, how proud he was of you." We ended up talking for 2 hours. She told me stories about Dad that I'd never heard, how he'd worried about leaving me alone, how he'd asked the nurses to make sure I was eating and sleeping enough. "He loved you so much," she said, "but he was also worried about your marriage. He talked to you about that?" Rebecca nodded carefully. "He mentioned that your wife seemed absent during everything. He was concerned about what would happen to you after he was gone." He saw more than I realized. Dying people often do. They have a clarity about relationships that the rest of us miss. When she asked if I was still married, I told her the whole story. Unlike my friends, she didn't offer advice or judgment. She just listened. "I'm sorry," she said when I finished. "That must have been devastating." It was, but it also freed me from something that was already broken. We started seeing each other regularly, not dating at first, just friendship with someone who understood grief and loss. She'd lost her own father 2 years earlier and knew the complicated emotions that came with watching a parent die. Rebecca was everything Veronica wasn't. She was present during difficult conversations. She asked about my feelings without trying to fix them. She shared her own vulnerabilities without keeping score. When I told her about the inheritance, she was happy for me, but not interested in the details. She didn't ask how much or what I planned to do with it. She just said it was nice that I could pursue work I cared about instead of work I needed. 6 months after Dad's death, Rebecca and I were officially dating. She'd met my extended family, my friends, and fit seamlessly into my life. She wasn't trying to replace anything or anyone. She was just genuinely interested in building something new with me. That's when Veronica made her final play. I was at Rebecca's apartment when my phone rang. Veronica's number, which I'd blocked months ago, was somehow getting through. "Don't answer it," Rebecca said gently, but something made me pick up. "Tommy, please don't hang up." "What do you want, Veronica?" "I need to see you. It's important. We have nothing to discuss." "I'm pregnant." The words hit me like a physical blow. Rebecca, who could only hear my side of the conversation, moved closer, concern on her face. "What?" "I'm pregnant. With your baby." "That's impossible. We were together before your father got sick, before everything fell apart." I did the math in my head. We'd had sex exactly once in the weeks before Dad's diagnosis. A quick, mechanical encounter that felt more like obligation than intimacy. It was possible, but unlikely. "I need to see you," she continued. "We need to talk about what this means for us. If you're really pregnant, we can talk, but not about us. There is no us. There's going to be an us if we're having a baby together. We'll see." I hung up and looked at Rebecca, who was trying to read my expression. "What's going on?" I told her about the call, about the pregnancy claim, about the timing and my doubts. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "I want a paternity test. And if it's yours, then I'll be the best father I can be. But that doesn't mean I'm getting back together with her." Rebecca nodded. "I understand. Do you? Because this complicates everything. Only if we let it." That evening, I met Veronica at a neutral location, a family restaurant where she couldn't make a scene. She looked tired and, for the first time since I'd known her, genuinely vulnerable. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. "If you're really pregnant, we need to discuss logistics. But I want a paternity test." Her face fell. "You don't believe me? I don't trust you. There's a difference." "Fair enough." She placed an ultrasound photo on the table. It showed a fetus at approximately 12 weeks development, which matched the timing of our last encounter. "I know you have every reason to doubt me," she said, "but this is real." "Okay, assuming it's mine, what do you want?" "I want us to try again, as a family." "That's not happening." "Tommy, I know I screwed up, but a baby changes everything. We could start over. You walked out on me when my father was dying. You came back when you heard about money. Now you're pregnant and want to try again. Do you see the pattern?" She started crying. "I know how this looks, but I love you. I've always loved you. You have a strange way of showing love. People make mistakes, big ones, but they can also change." I studied her face, looking for any sign of genuine emotion beyond desperation. "The inheritance condition still stands," I said finally. "If I reconcile with you, or give you money, I lose everything." Her crying stopped abruptly. "Even for child support?" "I'll pay child support. but through the courts with proper documentation, not by getting back together with you. So you'll support the baby, but not me. The baby didn't abandon me during the worst period of my life. She dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, smearing her carefully applied makeup. This isn't how I imagined telling you. How did you imagine it? I thought you'd be happy, that we'd figure out how to make it work. I might have been, before everything that happened. But you showed me who you are when things get difficult. What if I prove I've changed? How? She didn't have an answer for that. 2 weeks later, the paternity test results came back. The baby was mine. I stared at the document, processing what this meant for my future. I'd be tied to Veronica forever through this child. She'd have a legitimate reason to contact me, to be part of my life, to try to wiggle her way back into my finances. But as I thought about it more, I realized something else. I was going to be a father. Despite everything that had happened, despite the complicated circumstances, there was going to be a tiny person who was half me. That night, I called my Uncle Raymond, Dad's brother, who lived across the country. I heard about your father's will, he said after we'd caught up. Smart man. He never liked that woman. Did he talk to you about her? Many times. He said she was using you. Said he could see it but didn't know how to tell you without pushing you away. He found a way. How are you handling all this? I told him about Veronica's pregnancy, about the paternity test, about my fears that she was trying to use the baby to get access to the inheritance. Your father anticipated this, Raymond said. What do you mean? He called me about a week before he died. Said he was worried Veronica might try something desperate when she realized what she'd lost. He made me promise to remind you of something if it ever came to that. What? That being a good father doesn't require being married to a bad mother. The wisdom in that simple statement hit me immediately. I could love and support this baby without sacrificing my own well-being or rewarding Veronica's behavior. Over the following months, I worked with a family lawyer to establish clear boundaries. I would pay generous child support, provide health insurance, and be an active father. But I would not reconcile with Veronica, and I would not give her access to my inheritance. When our daughter Sophia was born, I was there. Not as Veronica's partner, but as the baby's father. The moment I held her, I understood why Dad had been so protective of our family bonds. This tiny person was the most important thing in my world. Veronica tried one last manipulation in the hospital room. Look at our family, she said as I held Sophia. We belong together. We're not a family, I said gently, not wanting to upset the baby. We're co-parents. What's the difference? A family supports each other through hard times. Co-parents share responsibility for a child. She was quiet for a long moment. I really did love you, you know. Maybe you did, but not enough to stand by me when I needed you most. 6 months later, Veronica moved to another state with Sophia for a job opportunity. She claimed it was about career advancement, but I suspected she was hoping distance would make me more willing to compromise about our relationship. Instead, I flew out every other weekend to see my daughter. I set up a nursery in my house for when she could visit. I video called every evening to read her bedtime stories. Being a long-distance father was challenging, but it also protected both Sophia and me from Veronica's ongoing attempts at manipulation. When she realized I was serious about maintaining boundaries, she gradually stopped the romantic overtures and focused on co-parenting. A year after Sophia's birth, Rebecca and I got engaged. She'd been patient through all the drama with Veronica, supportive during the pregnancy, and welcoming when I brought Sophia home for visits. Are you sure you want to take this on? I asked her the night I proposed. It's complicated. The best things usually are, she said. Rebecca had no interest in my inheritance money. She had her own career, her own savings, her own goals. When we got married, we kept our finances separate by mutual agreement. She wanted to build our life together through our combined efforts, not through money my father had left me. 2 years later, Rebecca and I had a son, David. Watching her during pregnancy and childbirth, I was struck by the contrast with my experience with Veronica. Rebecca was calm, confident, focused on our baby's well-being rather than on what this child might mean for our financial future. When Sophia met her baby brother, she was immediately protective and loving. At 3 years old, she had no understanding of the complicated circumstances that had brought her into the world. She just knew she had a daddy who read her stories, a stepmom who taught her to bake cookies, and a baby brother who made funny faces. One evening, as I was putting Sophia to bed during one of her visits, she asked a question that stopped me cold. Daddy, why doesn't Mommy live with us? I'd been dreading this conversation, knowing it would come eventually. Well, sweetheart, sometimes grown-ups are better at taking care of children when they live in different houses. But Tommy's mommy and daddy live together, she said, referencing her friend at preschool. Every family is different. What matters is that Mommy and Daddy both love you very much. She thought about this for a moment. Do you love Mommy? The question hung in the air. How do you explain to a 3-year-old that you can love her while not loving her mother? That relationships are complex, and sometimes people aren't good for each other even when they create something beautiful together. I love that Mommy gave me you, I said finally. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. She smiled and hugged me tight. I love you too, Daddy. As she drifted off to sleep, I thought about Dad's letter and his final gift to me. The money had been nice, but the real inheritance was the wisdom to choose people who would stand by me during difficult times. Rebecca, who had supported me through the custody negotiations and Veronica's ongoing drama. My true friends, who had seen through Veronica's victim narrative. Even Uncle Raymond, who had carried Dad's message to me when I needed to hear it most. 5 years after Dad's death, I was living a life that honored his memory and his values. I was present for my children, both of them. I was married to someone who saw me as a partner, not a bank account. I was using my financial freedom to pursue meaningful work and support causes that mattered to me. Veronica occasionally still tried to rekindle our relationship, especially when she faced financial difficulties, but those attempts became less frequent as she realized I wouldn't budge on the boundaries I'd established. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if Dad hadn't left that condition in his will. Would I have taken Veronica back? Would I have convinced myself that love could overcome what she'd done to me during his final weeks? I like to think I would have seen through her motivations eventually, but I was grateful I hadn't had to find out. The inheritance had given me financial security, but Dad's real gift was much more valuable. He'd given me the clarity to see people as they really were, not as I wanted them to be. He'd taught me that true love shows up during the hardest moments, not just the easy ones. And most importantly, he'd shown me that sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is protect their child from making a devastating mistake. On the 5th anniversary of his death, I took Sophia to visit his grave. She was 7 now, old enough to understand that Grandpa had died before she was born, but had loved her anyway. "Daddy, will you tell me about Grandpa?" she asked as we placed flowers on his headstone. "He was brave," I said, "and wise, and he loved his family more than anything else in the world." "Even more than money?" I smiled at her innocent question. "Much more than money, sweetheart. Much more." As we drove home, I thought about all the ways Dad continued to influence my life. His values guided how I parented Sophia and David. His example showed me what it meant to love someone enough to make hard decisions for their well-being. And his final gift, that conditional inheritance, had saved me from a life of wondering whether my wife loved me or just my bank account. The money was nice, but the peace of mind was priceless.